My name is Mary Beth Morris. I'm the immigration advisor. We also have helping me out, thank you very much, Megan Evangelist and Aaron Morelli, who both work on recruiting for our students. So some of you may know them as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can start looking at what we have in store for us today. So this presentation is really about employment. It's the first of two parts, today at noon, tomorrow again at noon. If we were in person, this would be one long session, but it was much too much to put together as one long Zoom today. So we thought a little bit easier, we can break it into two sessions. Today I'll be talking about just different employment opportunities. What does that mean for students who are here on F1 visas or J1 visas? And tomorrow we'll have one of a local immigration attorney that we work with who will be sharing a little bit more as well in terms of what does it mean, especially as you kind of finish up your program, what does it mean after graduation and that sort of thing. So, so somebody from Cohen and Grigsby will with us tomorrow. So we'll start here with what you can basically look at before graduation. The majority of your time is spent being a student. And so there are some options and some great opportunities that you can do while you're a student. So we'll talk a little bit about on-campus employment. Basically, you don't need any previous CVIS authorization. That's a very easy job and an allowable and acceptable job for our students to have. Because you are a student here, an F1 visa holder, you are allowed to work on campus. You can start as soon as you've arrived if you wish. And I'll kind of go through my little PowerPoint here just so we don't miss any of the important parts of it. So you don't need any previous CVIS authorization. That means you can find a job, but what you will need is a social security number, which is a number students are assigned. Basically all Americans are assigned usually at the point at which they're either looking for a job or born here. Most people get a social security number when they're an infant. So a social security number is required if you do work on campus. We can assist you to do that. There's a form that I have in the office that I will complete, pass along to you, and then the supervisor of your job on campus will also complete it. And you will take that along to a Social Security office here in Pittsburgh. Now, during the COVID pandemic, things are obviously very different. We're finding that some students are actually having a little longer wait time to get an appointment, but hopefully with vaccinations and everything opening up, that'll be a lot easier going into the future. So definitely plan ahead for a Social Security number. Work on campus can begin at any time. As I said, if you're a new student, you're allowed to start working, you can find a job. But the job must be in a student serving position. So something that is obviously related to being a student here. So things that are popular, working in the dining facilities, which could be any of the dining facilities on campus, or even catering, which is sometimes a little easier to schedule because these events tend to be in the evenings or on weekends. People look to work at Starbucks or maybe at Barnes & Noble in the bookstore. And there are certainly other jobs out there as well. The job can really be in any field of work. So it's not at all connected to your major. The employment is authorized because you are a student here at the university. So it's basically something that's just university related. So it gives you a lot of freedom. During classes, you can work up to about 20 hours maximum per week. We recommend that because your first and foremost duty is to your coursework. We don't want you to be overloaded with working too much. But during breaks, you can work more. You can work up to full time, up to 40 hours per week. One of the things that you'll want to look for, and I kind of have some screenshots here from the Duke websites, you want to look for a job that says no work study is required. And that little screenshot here is to kind of make that clear. Work study is something that the US government uses to really specifically designate an opportunity for a student to work off some of their tuition. That's the easiest way to say it. But because it's federal money, it's only available to US citizens. So official work study is something our international students, our F1s, J1s, wouldn't have. So you don't want something that says work study is required, because you would not qualify for that. So this is just an example here of some employment opportunities, through the career development website. They have great listings, great things out there, but mostly on campus, you're going to look at Parkhurst. So the different cafeterias around campus, and Barnes & Noble, as I mentioned before. And don't just go on website listings alone. Reach out, talk to somebody, find out about the job commitment. Don't get in over your head. Find something that's a good match for you, for your availability, the time that you have available to work, and what's reasonable with your own schedule. If you have a lot of labs, keep that in mind. If you're a music student and you have practice times, keep that in mind too. But it is a nice way to get to know students, to get to know campus, and to get a little bit of extra money. So it's not a bad idea. So continuing to talk about before graduating, another option, I get a good bit of questions about this, is what is CPT? CPT stands for Curricular Practical Training. And this is something that is authorized through CVIS. This is a benefit of being an F1 student on an I-20. Now it's very specific because it's connected to your curriculum. So it's got a lot more kind of restraint and restrictions around it than just a campus job. But what's unique about it is it can be off campus. So prior CVIS authorization is required from Duke Global and your academic department. So I will be involved, and if I hear from a student that says, oh, I'd like to find a job, then I also say, make sure you work with your academic advisor, because I need the academic support that says it's an appropriate program. Now, you can't start CPT as soon as you're a brand new student. That's kind of the catch that confuses a lot of students. But it can begin after 1 year of study. So if you're here in an undergraduate program, after you finish your freshman year, you could start looking for opportunities. It's really a much more common program for juniors and seniors in an undergraduate program, or graduate students in general, because you really need to have a good amount of training already in your field, a lot of that knowledge learned, to be able to do the job. So it's, as I said, it's much more common in the later years of an undergrad program or in graduate school in general. So after you have 1 year of study under your belt minimum, you can start. It can also be renewed multiple times. What's unique about CPT, obviously, as I said, it's in your field of study. It's part of your curriculum. That word curriculum is really what's important about this. So it has to be tied to the educational program. That means it's either being taken for credit. So it's something you're earning credit for, which means it's part of your academic schedule. It could be a required internship in the School of Business, for example. We see those quite a bit. But it could also just be something strongly supported by your department. Maybe it's a very unique opportunity that would just really enhance your studies. So it really has to be tied to your curriculum, and I'll stress that because that's part of the name. You can't just say, oh, this looks like a good job. It has to indeed be a good fit. So in order to apply, there's 2 elements that you'll need to have. You do have to have an offer letter from an employer first. So you can't say, I'd like to get authorized for CPT and then find a job. It actually works the other way around. So you would start by saying, okay, I found a job. It looks like a great fit. Here's the hire letter. They're offering me the job. You'll want to present that to both me and to your academic advisor. And then this can all be done via email. The academic advisor can also weigh in with me to say, oh, yes, this looks like a great opportunity. We strongly support it. Versus no, it's maybe not quite the right fit. So it's all going to start with a job offer. So having a letter from an employer. After that, if that's a good fit, you've got the support of the academic advisor, it's actually very easy for me to authorize. There are no special applications. It's pretty much those two things, the hire letter and approval from your academics. We do recommend that CPT be part-time, especially when school's in session, but also because if you are full-time on CPT, it can later affect your eligibility for OPT. Which we'll talk about at length here. That's probably what I get the most questions on is OPT. So we really recommend the part-time. Now, similar to what we were saying in terms of hours working, you could work up to 20 hours while school's in session, with some exceptions, maybe more. But also during breaks, there would be the opportunity to continue that employment between sessions, between semesters, or even over the summer. But again, it always has to be connected very tightly to your curriculum. So this is something we just always want to look for. Typically, when I also apply for CPT for students, I'll typically do it for one semester at a time. As we said, it can be renewed many times, but if it's something that you know you'd like to do longer, just stay in touch with me. If your offer letter doesn't have an end date specified, then that's great. We can continue to use that and just extend it longer. So as with any of these employments, the CVIS authorized ones, it's always important for students to be very aware of what their involvement is, that it's authorized prior to work. You would never want to begin working without the authorization first. As I said, that it's in the field, that it's approved, that you've got all your paperwork in order. It's very tricky, but it's a great benefit. So we just want to make sure that students follow all those guidelines exactly, because you don't want something to come up later where maybe you made a mistake and you're applying for a green card in the US. They're going to double check and look into all of these things. So it's always important to be maintaining your visa properly. And work is probably one of the more confusing aspects of it. So again, CPT, great option before graduation, must be authorized in advance. It can be renewed many times. Part-time, usually while school's in session, full-time during breaks. But just remember, if you're full-time, you would never want to work 1 year full-time CPT. If you work 365 days or 12 months, it will affect and in fact eliminate the availability for OPT afterward. So again, good record keeping track of dates is very important. So the next one, I get more questions on this probably than anything else here in the office. OPT. OPT stands for Optional Practical Training. Again, it's something granted through CVIS for F1 students, and it is usually done after graduation. I'll talk a little bit about an exception to that, but it's typically an after graduation opportunity. The benefit really comes along the lines of now you have a degree, you're graduating, experience would be even better. It would add so much more to your resume, to your repertoire as you go out and look for a job. It might be something specifically, you could get more experience in your field here in the US than perhaps back in your own home country. And so that really adds a lot to your education by having a year of experience. So there is prior authorization required that will come through me, through Duke Global and through CVIS. The work would begin after graduation. And just like CPT, it must be in your field of study and it has to be appropriate for your level of education. One of the nice things with OPT is that it actually is available to students after each degree. So if you were to have earned an associate's degree, which is a 2-year degree, Duquesne doesn't offer any of those on the undergraduate level, you could get OPT. After you finish a 4-year bachelor's degree, you could apply for OPT. If you do a master's program, you can apply for OPT. And if you apply for your PhD or your educational doctorate and so on, you can apply for OPT again. So it's very nice that each level of education is recognized as being able to have an appropriate work experience afterward. But because of that, we want to make sure if you've finished your master's, your PhD, that you're not taking a job that really would be something for an undergraduate student who's just completed a bachelor's degree. So we look at that closely. We're happy to help steer you in the right direction. Career Services, again, offers great services for helping you to find a job after graduation. These jobs are perfect opportunities for OPT. The process is involved. So unlike the very easy process of finding a job on campus or a CPT approval, it's an involved process, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. It's lengthy. You have to collect a lot of documents, but they also allow you to apply up to 90 days before you graduate. So planning ahead is very good. You actually have the benefit that you can also apply for it up to 60 days after you graduate. So if you don't think you're interested or you can't find a job, you can apply anyway. You do not have to have a job first to get approved for OPT. It's basically for you to be approved for the opportunity to find a job. So you could do OPT full-time. In fact, you really need to. You're here, that's your main reason after graduation. You want to have a full-time job in your field. So that could be anywhere from 20 to 40 hours. And it could also be more than one job. It could be one full-time job. It could be multiple part-time jobs. Again, if the more experience you can get, the better, not a problem. It is important. We must log all these employers in CBIS. So it's something that I'll help you with. It's something I'll kind of still be a link to you after graduation for this reason, to make sure your CBIS records are up to date. Students will be permitted up to 90 days of unemployment. So if you apply for OPT, we'll talk about that process and what you'll get. It's called an EAD card, an employment authorization document. And that will have your official start date listed. So that's the date you want to keep track of unemployment. So let's say you don't have a job, you're closing in on graduation, you apply for OPT, you get approved. Once you have the start date on your card and you don't have a job, that's when your 90 days start to add up. So it's just very important to kind of keep track of those things. Now, you can go beyond 90 days, but if you don't have a paying job, you're required to volunteer in your field. And again, minimum of 20 hours a week. The main reason is you're here for work. You're here for work experience. You're here to continue a little longer beyond the classroom education into a more hands-on education. So that is why it's very important that you are limited in the number of unemployment days. They want you to be contributing in your field, but ideally you're getting paid to do it. The last thing listed here on this slide is if you are a STEM major, and I can tell you if you are, you can extend OPT after your first year for an additional 2 more years, an additional 24 months. This is a wonderful opportunity, especially since these are very specialized fields, high in demand. The opportunities I would think are out there. So we'll talk a little bit later about what STEM application is like. But that doesn't come until after you're just about wrapping up your first year of OPT. And again, you're in a STEM field. You can easily Google STEM fields for OPT and you'll get the listing. It's not a secret list, but we just want to make sure that your major code is exactly that at the time of graduation. If you think you're STEM, please verify that with me. So the process before OPT, you're going to begin your application with me, and I even say about 100 days before graduation, so it gives you about 10-day buffer. We have the new immigration portal that I know some of you have started to use, and that's actually kind of helping us to streamline for you collecting your documents and that sort of thing. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But really kind of have this on your calendar 100 days before graduation. That's the earliest you might want to start reaching out to me, collecting your documents. But once it's all ready, you can mail it in 90 days before. Do not mail it 91 days. They will return it. They will reject it and return it. They're very strict. So I actually will help you calculate the exact number of days. And once it's being processed, it actually takes about 90 days. A little bit this year, it was taking longer. Obviously, we think it was because of COVID. But the students who just graduated in December have been reaching out to me just now in March and early April that they're getting their EAD cards. So you will wait to receive confirmation. Usually it will be via email, but ultimately it's when you get your card in the mail. It's going to look kind of like a driver's license with your photo on it. And that is extremely important. Once that's been authorized, that EAD card is pretty much just as important as your I-20. In fact, at all times, if you're traveling outside of the US and re-entering, you will always need to have that EAD card and an I-20 together, because that now is what's making your I-20 valid. You're beyond your classroom time, but now you have the work authorization. During OPT, you've got your card, you've got your start date, your end date, you can begin working according to those dates. If you're not, however, you will need to keep track of your unemployment days. That's something that's each student's responsibility. It's obviously much easier for you to do it than for me to try to keep track of everyone. But you will have 12 months of time to work. So go out there, really find some great opportunities. You can change jobs when you're on OPT. As long as we're logging your work activity, we're updating your employers in CVIS, you're not stuck to just one job. So, find other opportunities. The other interesting thing is, because this is on a national level here in the US, you can do this work anywhere in the US. You don't have to be in Pittsburgh. You don't have to be in Pennsylvania. It can be somewhere warmer, for instance, if you're tired of our snow or our rain. But again, look for opportunities that are out there and don't feel like you're limited to just the Pittsburgh area. And as you're nearing the end of OPT, if you're eligible, you can apply for the STEM extension. One thing I will say for a STEM extension, for the few of you who might apply to, or who maybe are already in that process now, you do need to have a job offer to get a STEM extension. It has to be in your field. And you do have to apply for the STEM OPT before the regular OPT ends. There's no grace period after. If your regular OPT ends, you haven't applied for STEM, it's over. So make sure you do it up to 90 days before. As your OPT is ending, be very, very attuned to that end date on your EAD card. You do not want to work longer than you're approved. Again, it's something that later on, you don't want it to catch up with you if you are applying for another visa or applying for any sort of residency here in the US. So when OPT ends, you've got a grace period of 60 days with which to either leave the US or transfer to another institution, or really even apply for a change of visa if you wish. But that's a good thing to keep in mind. 60 days at the end of OPT with which to kind of wrap everything up or move on to the next step. So this is a screenshot. It looks a little differently now with our portal, but this is a really good overview. So I still wanted to be able to show you this to give you an idea of the resources that are out there through our website and through the immigration portal. But the process is all listed because it's all on the website. There's links. You can kind of easily tab right through, find what you're looking for. But in terms of the process, and we'll kind of go through this because I really do get a lot of questions. I'm always happy to email this out to you as well. It's a nice way to kind of keep it as a checklist that you haven't missed anything. But the most important thing, as you'll see listed, is the Form I-765. The government loves form numbers on their forms. So that's what this is for. This is for work. Once you see the form, you also realize it's used for other things. So there'll be parts of it you'll leave blank. That seems maybe a little confusing to you, but ultimately, not every question on that form will be applicable to an F1 student applying for OPT. So we have links straight to the form. I am always happy to look over your form to help you answer any of those unsure questions. There are things that are unique to each student. And so sometimes it'll say, where were you born versus what's your citizenship? And those could be two different places, two different countries. So you really need to read it carefully and make sure you're answering everything accurately. I want to kind of go down through those little things to where it says for question 27, because this is the one that's probably the most confusing. It's asking under what stipulation, what is the relevant code that allows you to apply for OPT? And there's 3 listed there. There's the post-completion OPT, which is literally the letter C, the number 3, and the letter B. The next one down talks about STEM. Again, for those few of you that it would apply to, it changes one thing, C3C. And then the pre-completion OPT has its own code, C3A. So I'll take a moment here to explain what pre-completion OPT is. A lot of people think, oh, I can do pre-completion OPT and then do OPT. You actually can't. Pre-completion OPT is very, very stringent and really only would apply to students who are in a graduate program, who have finished their coursework in the classroom and are writing a dissertation. So in a sense, there are no more classes that you would be taking, but maybe there's a great job in your field that you'd like to apply for. But remember, you've still got a dissertation to write. So you're not going to have all the time in the world. I very rarely see anybody do pre-completion OPT. I think it would be unusual for someone to have that much time available to be able to work full-time, especially in their field. And I would hate for that to take the place of post-completion OPT after the degree has been conferred. So it's very rare. If you think it might apply to you, reach out to me. Again, it would be someone in a graduate program who's finished all their classroom work and are just writing a dissertation or a thesis. So anyway, but those 3 categories are listed for that reason. It's because they are different. They have different codes. The next form after that listed, the G1145, is a very easy form. Again, the link is right there. It basically is a way to gather your information via email, so they can contact you via email. That's the only reason that form exists. It's 1 page and it's very straightforward. One thing that will change with OPT versus what you're normally used to as an F1 student is that because they collect your email address and look to reach out to you via email, you actually will have a link to CVIS, to your CVIS record when you're on OPT, that you would never have had as a normal student. Maybe eventually they'll change it so that students will have a little bit more access early on, but I think this is a wonderful benefit. It's just a nice way for you to be able to do a few things directly. And this is to kind of help it make it easy, because you might have moved away from Pittsburgh. They recognize students aren't staying in their college town, and therefore maybe don't have the connection to their international offices like they used to. So doing this form, having them contact you via email will allow you to set up a portal with CVIS. And through that portal, you can register if you've changed your mailing address. They need to always know that they have the current address. You can update your employer information. So things that normally I would be doing for you, you actually can do when you're on OPT. If you didn't get the link, you can reach out to me. I can resend it to you, but it actually is a direct link from CVIS for your records. So that's kind of a new part to this that I think is really nice. But a lot of times I hear from students that they never saw the email or didn't get it. So we want to make sure that you have that electronic link to your record. As we go down the list, some of it's just the very normal, maybe boring sorts of things. Passport photos, very typical, like you would have for a passport, visa, etc. The filing fee is currently $410. Even if you changed your mind after you submitted the application, you would not get that back. If for some reason they denied your application, you would not get that back. It's just part of the process of applying for the work authorization for OPT. So be prepared to pay that. You can pay it by a check or by money order. There is a way to pay it by credit card, which is relatively new. I don't see too many students doing that right now. But one thing I will say is if you do pay by check, a personal check, you'll know when that's been cashed because it'll come out of your bank account. And I've heard from a lot of students that's the one way they know that their application is actually being processed, because there's just a lot of waiting. There's 90 days of waiting. And when that check gets cashed, they realize, okay, I'm finally starting to move through the process. So if you can, that might be a good reason to use the check from your personal account as opposed to a money order. The next thing down is a letter from your academic advisor, which can also be an email to me, basically indicating that your degree program would be completed. It's confirming that you'll be graduating. So this is not part of the process of the forms that get mailed in. It's rather something that confirms it with me, that yes, indeed, you are at the end of your program. And this is a good catch-all because I've had students whose program dates maybe were in the future, and I thought their end date was maybe December of 2021, and they reached out to me to apply for OPT, and I realized, oh, you're not within 90 days of graduating. And then I get the letter from the advisor that says they've actually sped up and are going to finish early. And that's important for me to know because I need to change your program end date on the I-20 and in your CVIS record. So that's one of the reasons we ask for those things. Photocopies of all your past and current forms of I-20s, and that could be a lot. I often have students say, I don't know if I still have every copy. I've been to 3 different schools. I'm in my PhD program now. Do the best you can. But since you're not quite there yet, save everything. I always tell students to keep every copy of their I-20s from the very beginning and onward. And it's for reasons like this, when you have to provide copies of them, that they become so vital. They're also going to want a photocopy of your passport with your photo page and info page with the expiration date. For some people, that's just 1 page. For some people, it's on 2 different pages of their passports. You will not send your real passport. Do not send your real passport. And they also want a copy of the F1 visa that's inside your passport as a sticker. Now, don't worry if your visa has expired, and that's just something that we always kind of have to remind students. That F1 visa, that sticker in your passport, is awarded to basically get you over the border and into the US. We kind of liken it to a key. It's the key you need to turn that door and open it. Once you are inside, you don't really need that key anymore because you're here. And that's when your I-20 would normally take over and kind of maintain your status for you. So you can be within the US and have an expired F1 visa, and it's okay as long as your I-20 is still valid and your I-20 is not expired. So even if it's an expired visa, they still want a copy of it to be included as part of your paperwork for OPT. So no worries if it's expired, just photocopying it. And the last one that's kind of cut off down there is a photocopy of your I-94 form, which I can assist you to get, but honestly, it's available to anyone on the internet. Just Google I-94 card, and you'll find it. You'll just enter your passport information. It can pull up your record. But again, if you need assistance with that, just let me know. So those are very obvious kind of documents. Those are the important things that you're collecting. You're always holding on to. Once we have all of this together, and I know what start date you want for your OPT, then I will go into your CVIS record, enter that, indicate that you're applying for OPT, and it will generate a new I-20 for you. And that's the last piece of all of this. You can't do it without my help. You can't do it without the new I-20, because that's very vital that when your application is mailed in, your CVIS record electronically already says that you've applied for OPT, and then you submit a new I-20 with that printed on it with my signature and your signature as well. So it's a little lengthy. It's really not that complicated. Most of these things you already have. Maybe just take a little bit of extra effort to get copies of all of them. But it's of all these processes, it is the more involved, but it's really, really not that bad. So it's nice to kind of go through this with you. The more you hear it, the more it makes sense. That's why we're recording this, so you can kind of watch this over again. And we can have the slides available to you as well. But just some things to kind of really reiterate to you as to how the process works, because we know it's so vital. It can be so crucial for you to have experience in your job, in your field, in a job, so that by the time you return home, you're bringing not only your education, but some real world experience with you. So the process is laid out on our website. We'll have all those links for you. You can apply up to 90 days before. For any of you who might be here on a J visa, a J is just a little different than the F student visa. A J is considered an exchange student or scholar. And currently with COVID, we don't seem to have as many as we've had in the past. Typically, J students are here for maybe a shorter period of time because they'll return to their home institution to finish. But if you are a J visa holder, we'll go through these real quick. J visa holders can work on campus. You do need authorization from our office. So again, we're here to help you. There's a form. We'll help you get set up with that. Again, you would need the social security number. So very similar to what an F1 student would do if they were applying for a job on campus. You could start it right away. So again, as soon as you get here. And typically students would work about 20 hours a week when classes are in session, or 40 hours during breaks. So again, a nice job, meet people, get to know campus, get a little spending money. It's a nice opportunity for those who are interested. And the other thing for J1 visas is academic training. Again, that would be required from Duke Global and the academic department. It could begin at any time. And this is similar to like the CPT. This must be in the field of study. So basically, this is kind of the equivalent of what CPT would be for F1 visa holders. And the academic training does have a limit to a maximum of 18 months or the end of study. So that can only happen during that period of study. So whichever one ends first, that's, that would end, and that would conclude the academic training. It's always worth mentioning volunteering. Great opportunity, especially as the world opens back up. There are a lot of people with a lot of needs. And it's something I think it's a very spirit and value that you hear a lot at Duquesne, is serving, the underprivileged, serving in areas where there are needs, and there can be different levels of needs, physical needs, spiritual needs. So as an institution, we're very supportive of volunteering, and we'll encourage you to do it when you can. But a few things we'll go through just to be careful so it doesn't get confused or look like work. Again, we want to keep your work record very, very clean. So there's no authorization needed. But if you're not sure about something with volunteering, just ask. Because it's volunteer work, it really must be charitable in nature. So working at something like a food pantry, working for community service. If there were service trips, either abroad or across the state, things like that, shouldn't be a problem. But if you're not sure, reach out and ask me. The most important part is that it should not resemble work, work that somebody would normally get paid for. That's when it gets a little tricky. And we really kind of don't recommend that. If it sounds like a job or an internship, it probably is. And so don't go forward without reaching out to us. Maybe there is an opportunity that it could be an internship for you, even if it's an unpaid internship. So let's make sure we get all the documentation right, so that we have it in the right order, so that it doesn't interfere with anything down the road. So as with most of the time, maintaining your F1 visa or your J1 visa, it's just making sure you're understanding what you're allowed to do, what you're permitted to do, understanding the limitations, and being cautious when you can. Always ask questions. There are never any dumb questions. Please reach out. We would rather you ask us questions than try to help solve a problem later down the road. So great opportunities out there for you. So this is basically the end of my slides. It's a lot to digest. I hope we haven't lost you. But again, it's such an important benefit. It's such an important element of your experience here in the US that it's really worth detailing it and promoting it, that if you feel like, oh, it's maybe too much effort, or I don't know if I'd find a job, that doesn't mean you can't apply anyway, get started, start looking. And if the time comes and you say, I might have applied and gotten approved for OPT, but in the end, I'm not going to use it, that's fine too. There's nothing, no negativity associated with that. You just reach out to me and we can cancel it on your I-20, and then you'd have your grace period to depart and leave home. So again, just some great opportunities. But I want to see if you have any questions. Megan's been there in the background helping out.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary Beth. This was really helpful information. So we do have some great questions in the chat. The first one is, how do you define graduation date for graduate students? So would that be the thesis submission date, defense date, or degree issue date?
That is an excellent question. We typically consider graduation date the date when the diploma is conferred, the end of your program. But because we're talking a little bit about pre-completion OPT, for students who maybe have completed their coursework, are still writing their thesis, that's still considered study time, if you will, study time. So we really look at that end date as when the degree is conferred. So for me, when I do I-20s, there are typically only 3 end dates a year. You either end in May, usually, May 7th this year. You end in August, I think it's around the 18th this year, or you end in December, and I think that's around the 18th and 19th as well. So it's a very structured time when you would end.
Thank you. So for CPT, does Duquesne have any radius restrictions on location?
That's another good question. We don't. I have a student who was looking at doing something in Cleveland. In case you don't know, Cleveland's a little far. Cleveland is not a day trip. And we talked about that. But the difference was it was going to be something available to him in the summer. And so he had thought about, I could move to Cleveland. It was a great opportunity. I think it was with Cleveland Clinic, which is a really wonderful hospital system. And so we really don't have it. I think the difference would be, is it during the school year when you need to be connected to campus, especially if classes are going to be in person again, versus when it's on the breaks. But it's a good question. And if a job comes up, I'd be happy to look at it and see if there's any, any reason for concern.
Thank you. The next is, can employment be hired but unpaid? For example, could it be a full-time unpaid internship or volunteer activity?
Another good question. Yes, it can. It seems kind of confusing to say you're hired, but we're not paying you. Everybody would rather get paid. But yeah, it can be unpaid. For your sake as a student, I would hope you do get paid, but sometimes when it's under the umbrella of an internship, it becomes unpaid. But yeah, it could count.
Great, thank you. The next is, do we need a social security number for CPT? When can we get a social security number? And would this be once we have a hire letter from the job?
Yes, you would need a social security number for a job, for any job. And yes, specifically for CPT. One thing I'll mention, and this is just based on experience, is if you can get a job on campus, even for just one semester, that allows you to apply for a social security number. Once you have a social security number, it is always your number. It will never change. So the number I have, I probably got when I was born, and I still use it, I still use it today. So it's kind of a nice shortcut if you can get a job on campus. As I said, great opportunity to meet people, make some money, because it allows you to apply for a social security number. And then you have a social security number for any future off-campus job that comes up, like CPT or OPT. So it's kind of a secret way to get in and have a social security number before you need it. So I kind of recommend that if you can, give it some thought.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Another student asked about applying for a summer camp job that will last 6 weeks, and that is 30 hours per week. So after that, the student does not have another outside of campus job. So would this type of job be considered a full-time CPT or part-time CPT opportunity?
These are great questions. I'm so glad. It helps me cover all the things I might not have thought of. I actually have someone in a similar situation. It would be, if it's 21 hours or more, it's considered full-time. Up to 20 is part-time. So we usually say 21 and over is full-time. But what's really good for CPT is we put the dates in. The dates are required. So we would always be able to say, you know, maybe the camp job started May 15th and goes until, you know, July 15th. Then it ends. So even if it's full-time, it's only going to be maybe those 2 months of full-time. Which I said, remember, you don't want 12 months or more because that would later impact OPT. So it can be a short period of time. But the other thing is, because students are always entitled to a summer vacation, you don't have to work. So if you wanted to work, you found a job, let's say full-time for 2 months, great. And then you can not work at all until the next semester begins. You can travel home, you know, or do something like that. So did I cover all the points on that one?
Yes, that was great. Thanks, Mary Beth. The next question is about applying for an open position in the department at Duquesne University after graduation. So would this be considered OPT?
It could be. I do have some students doing OPT who are actually working in their department. So if it's a sort of a research assistant, research associate, but a paid position, a job position, not a graduate assistant position, then yeah, you could. In fact, one young lady just finished up and was transferring to another institution where they had offered her a full-time job and were going to apply for an H-1B visa for her. So it's really great experience because it does open up a lot of doors.
Great. The next question is for the 90 days of unemployment, does it start after summer break or does it start at the day of graduation?
It's actually neither, but that's a very, very good question. The 90 days of unemployment are really tied to the authorization dates for employment that show up on the EAD card. So let's say you were graduating May 7th, your EAD card came in with a start date of June 15th. June 15th is the first date that you could work. And if you're not working, that would be your first day of unemployment.
Thank you. So the next question is, what is the legal time that the student can stay in the US after graduation without applying for OPT?
That is 60 days. It's the same amount of time that, you know, you have that grace period of 60 days to apply for OPT. So it's basically the whole time after graduation that you're allowed to be here, 60 days. You can also still have that last chance to apply for OPT if you want. So 60 days.
Great. The next question is, do we print just the first page of the I-94 or should it include the travel history?
Usually I just do the first page with the most recent information, but it can't hurt to have the travel history as well. So it's not a bad idea. If I'm impressed someone knows that there's 2 pages.
The next question is, if the expected graduation date is in fall 2021, is it possible to extend for 1 semester to graduate in spring 2022?
That is really more of a question for the academic department, because there's gonna be a couple reasons that it could work or it might not work. If you were an undergraduate and you were set to graduate in December, let's say you had 15 credits you were going to take in the fall, you only have to be full-time at 12. 12 is full-time on the undergraduate level. That if that course, that 5th course, those last 3 credits is available in the spring, you could extend it. and it would be easy to do. Your advisor can reach out to me. We can push back graduation 1 semester. And your last semester, you are allowed to be part-time. And that's why it's okay that there's only 3, because that's all that you have left. And I do see that some people reach out to say that, the timing, they would rather graduate then, or, they're not ready to leave yet, or whatever it might be. The difference might be on a graduate level. That would be a lot harder to answer. So I would probably defer those to each school. Again, depending on the school, sometimes graduate enrollment is full-time at 6 credits, sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 9, because you would need to maintain full-time enrollment for every semester except for the last one. But it might be possible.
Thank you. So a student has their OPT approved and has the EAD card. And the question is it possible to travel outside of the United States with the EAD card and valid F1 visa? So then would they be allowed back into the US?
Great question. Yes. A few caveats I'd add to that in terms of being prudent in your decision to travel. If you've received the EAD card, yes, that's the most important thing. If you had applied, not been approved, not received the EAD card, I would not recommend travel, because if it's issued while you're gone and it's in your mailbox, at the border when you enter, they're going to expect you to have it in your hands, and you won't. And for that reason, they could deny entry. But if you have it approved, you've received the EAD card, absolutely, you can travel. Always make sure you have your I-20. I would recommend having the travel endorsement as well. And if you're already in a job or have a job offer, I recommend having a letter from your employer. It's just one more piece of supporting documentation in case you'd need it at the border. But typically an I-20 and the EAD card will both together suffice.
Thank you. Another really good question. The student enrolled in fall 2020 and attended remotely because of COVID travel restriction. So the student arrived late in the US in December 2020. So the student is wondering about CPT eligibility. When would that start for this student?
Yeah, that's such a tricky question because of COVID this year. We've never had to face that before. I would say it might depend on 2 things. If it's an undergrad student, they would need to have at least 1 full year in the US. So if they arrived in December 2020, not before December 21, would they be eligible? If it was a graduate program, because those are already shorter in nature, usually 2 years, it's possible that after 8 months, it might be allowed. With some exceptions, maybe even less than 8 months. Ultimately, if it's required by the program, by that academic program, that's going to be the most support for it to be approved. If it's not a requirement, it's going to be very, very tricky. And we've had a few of these situations this year, and it's heartbreaking because we cannot, a brand new student cannot be registered in CVIS as attending until they're physically in the US. And so that clock doesn't start until they've arrived. So yeah, that's a really tricky one, but we were happy to look at them all on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. We have, it looks like 2 more questions, and I know we're coming up on 1 o'clock. So the next is the student has applied for OPT and has admission to advance at the university into the PhD program. So is the student eligible to retain OPT work? What would be the student's status?
If let's say the PhD program started in August and the graduation for the lesser, lower level program, master's or bachelor's was May graduation, you could work all summer with the EAD card, and then you would have to end the OPT in order to be a full-time student in the next program. So you could do it temporarily. You can't do it both and overlap. It's kind of an either or, but because summer is a break, you actually could take advantage of that time and do that work over the summer.
Great. And I wanted to let everyone know that as we're wrapping up, I did put Mary Beth's email address into the chat, morrism4@duq.edu. And you can also reach out to immigration@duq.edu if we haven't answered your question and you still would like to chat more. Please, please, please reach out. So Mary Beth, the next question is about the due date for applying for OPT after graduation.
So the most you could do after graduation is to submit it 60 days after graduation. If you did it 61 days, it would probably be denied. They are very, very particular. So the maximum amount of time would be 60 days after the date of graduation, which is on the I-20.
Thank you. And this may be a question for Larry tomorrow, but for someone who has applied for OPT and is later employed as staff in an organization, when would they begin the R1 visa process?
Well, our visas are for religious workers usually. And so whoever the employer is that wanted to apply for that, they could begin it at any time. And it might be wise if they had overlap time to be able to have several months to finish OPT. I have no idea how long an R application takes, but I do know that a lot of change of status applications here in the US are taking over 12 months right now. And I really think that's because of COVID. I probably have at least one person going on 15 months waiting. It's really lengthy. But that would be probably a question better for Larry in case he has a little bit more experience with the R's and what that process is like.
Thanks, Mary Beth. And this will be our final question. So the question is about, does the student choose the date that will appear on the EAD card based on the letter of employment, assuming that someone has already secured a job, or does USCIS provide its own date?
Usually the student picks the date. Let's say, for instance, I was applying in March and I was graduating in May and I knew I wanted to start June 1st. I can choose a date no more than, I'm trying to think how it works, 60 days after graduation to start. But let's say it wasn't processed in time and they couldn't get the June date that I wanted. They'll give me the next earliest date that they can. So they'll try to be as close as they can. Sometimes you miss a few days. We have heard that because of COVID, for anyone who's lost those early days, that they're going to add them at the end. We're hoping that actually happens. I'm not sure that it will. But it's a nice gesture, so we hope it does, because then it would kind of help eliminate anyone having missed any time just because of a lengthier process.
Great. Everyone, thank you so much for these fabulous questions. I'm really impressed. And Mary Beth, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and being such a great support to the students.
Of course. We're delighted so many of you tuned in and signed up, so thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow to meet with Larry at noon. So hoping that you all have a great day. Bye, everyone.